Well, hello and welcome to The Big Conversation. From Big Conversation brings the biggest thinkers together to discuss the biggest questions in science, faith and philosophy. I'm joined on today's show by Richard Dawkins and Francis Collins to talk about biology, belief and COVID. Richard Dawkins is Emeritus Professor of the Public Understanding of Science at Oxford University. He's a world-renowned scientist. His book, The Selfish Gene, is a classic of evolutionary biology. But Richard, of course, is well known also for his critiques of religion as an atheist. His book, The God Delusion, was a bestseller when it was published. And his most recent books include Outgrowing God, A Beginner's Guide to Atheism. Francis Collins is also a renowned geneticist who oversaw the Human Genome Project and was, until recently, director of the National Institutes of Health in the USA, leading their response to COVID, and just recently been appointed as acting science advisor to the president. Francis is a committed Christian. His 2006 book, The Language of God, A Scientist Presents Evidence for Belief, explained why he believes God and science do go together. So today we'll be looking at the different journeys of these two men, why two eminent scientists come to such different conclusions about God.
The same place here.
Absolutely.
As far as
There's no doubt about that. Yeah.
Right. But you said that, it's happened just because of the laws of physics. I want to take this back to that step. Where did those come from?
Well, let's get to that then, because you keep getting to that, and that I believe that's a very profound. If somebody was going to convince me of the need for a God, it would be there. It would be not in my own field of biology, and I found. I've read The Language of God, and indeed I reread it today. I read it first when it came out. Physical constants. Things like the speed of light, gravitational constant, and strong and weak force and things. Most physicists agree, that if you change any of those constants by even a very, very small amount, then we don't come into existence. The universe doesn't come into existence. They have to be like that in order for galaxies to form, for stars to form, for chemistry to form, actually. And then for the prerequisite for life to evolve, it needs that as well. So that's the nearest approach to a good argument. By the way, I want to be very careful about this, because I once said that, I'm not going to mention the name of the man I was having a debate with. He seized onto that later, and then I think a couple of days later, he went up to Scotland and said, "Dawkins is a convert. He's or not quite that." I think
you gave an inch and he took a mile.
Exactly.
Yes. Well, look, I'm very familiar with this argument as well. Often called the argument for God from fine tuning. It's essentially a design argument. It's saying, look at the extraordinary fine tuning of these initial constants of the universe. If they differed from their actual value just a tiny bit, we wouldn't have a universe capable of producing life. And
we need an explanation for the fine tuning, and so we postulate a fine tuner. But you haven't explained anything. I mean, you simply invented.
Okay.
You've magicked away the problem.
And this has been one of your key arguments in your books, Richard. Just positing God just leaves you with something more complex to describe something.
Well,
more
there's that. But yes. I think, but also, yes. You might convince somebody like me to be a deist, but then suddenly, okay, then we get Jesus Christ, and then we get crucifixion, then we get resurrection, we get virgin birth. That's nothing to do with it. I mean, that's a positively dishonest way of smuggling in what you really want. Well, not you, but I mean what some Christians really want, which is to bring in Jesus or Allah and Muhammad or Buddha, whatever it is. You cannot do that. I mean, you've got either you're going to stick with a fine-tuning argument, which is a good argument, or you've got to produce a really good argument for Jesus. But don't think that because you've convinced somebody by the fine-tuning argument to be a deist, that therefore he's then got to believe in Jesus.
Right. Sure. Well, let's take those one at a time. Maybe Francis, start with this problem that Richard has of, look, is God a satisfactory explanation? Aren't you just substituting a mystery with a mystery at this point?
So yeah, let's tackle that. I'm glad that we all kind of agree. The fine-tuning is a puzzle that seems to ask for some kind of explanation. The Goldilocks Enigma, I think, was the title of the book about this. And it is really remarkable just how fine-tuning that fine-tuning is. The alternative, of course, is to postulate that there are an infinite number of other universes that have different settings of those particular constants, and we could only be in one where it happened to work, so that's why we're observing it from here. Of course, we don't expect there will ever be an experimental means of actually detecting the presence of those universes, so that's a bit of a leap of faith as well. But I go a little beyond just the fine-tuning argument, also to the argument about the Big Bang and what came before that. And here, Richard, is where I don't agree with your argument that if you say God is the creator who actually set this all in motion and, as you have said, twiddled the dials for these constants, that then you need to create a reason or a creator of God to start the whole thing off. Because again, I think of God as being outside space and time, so all of our arguments about how you have to have a beginning and an end don't apply anymore. Because if God is actually locked into space and time, you've got an infinite regress problem. But I don't think that's the case once you postulate a much broader sense of what the existence of God would be like.
But you do think that God is a satisfactory explanation for that beginning? You think that there has to be something like a God to explain why there is anything at all?
I think that's entirely rational and defensible as a position to take. It doesn't prove it, of course. And again, I'll say, as I did earlier, I don't think we're going to discover a proof of God in this conversation, but it's consistent. And then, Richard, as far as going from those arguments to the resurrection, no, of course, that requires, and I went through that for 2 years, kicking and screaming, as I said, it's kind of like the base camp. Richard, you've made it to base camp, but at the top of the mountain, there's a cross, and it might just be a little bit more of a trek to get up there. That was my trek, at least, because I encountered a total sense of unease and dissatisfaction at stopping at the deist version of God because of this issue about good and evil, and where does that come from, and how do we put that into the equation of who we are and who God might be.